Hi, my name is Ronaldo Quintero, also known as Reiq, and today I'll be showing you how to work with the Copic markers using the grayscale. In this case, I'm using my favorite ones, which are the cool grays, and I'll be going through the process that I usually go when I'm doing commissions or any black and white illustrations using these markers. And to start, I like to use the C1, which is the lightest of the range. And you have from C1 to C10. And you have all these range that you can work, but I start always with the C1, and I like to start with C1 because I can map out and I can start designing my light source. Since it's the lightest tone, I can easily rearrange the lighting at this point. Although I already have a good idea of what I want, you can design a little bit better, and you have more flexibility in case you change your mind. And you only have to think about that light source and how much light and shade will be affecting the character and all the elements in your picture. So you have to plan ahead a little bit before that. You have to make some decisions and then go ahead and use the markers. So I'll start with the C1. And you can also test the lighting by printing out small thumbnails, and with the markers you can do a quick studies and a quick test to see what works best with your illustration, or if you are really cool and then you can see already ahead what it's gonna look like, then go ahead and do the illustration. And I usually use C1 for the skin tone. I think that as soon as I decide the skin tone and the light direction with C1, I can start moving to C2 and start covering more of the illustration. At this point, I'm more like feeling and trying to decide as I go where I'm gonna leave certain areas open for highlights. And one of the rules that I follow or like to follow is that I think this way. I think I'm reserving and saving the white spaces of my white sheet to use them as the highlights and as a light source. And that's what I like to think about it. And I like to think about how much white I should save, or I should not use in order to create the lighting effect that I want. And that's why the C1 is really good, because I'm kind of like this. I'm designing, okay, this area is gonna have sun, this area is gonna have. I want this edge here to serve as a rim light. So I'm doing all of that with the C1. Because if I start using a darker tone, then I won't be able to go back to it, or I have to be pretty sure. So I like to start shading lightly my illustrations for that. And once I work with the C1 and I start feeling most of the parts of the illustration and making my decisions, I start thinking about the character properties. Like, what about the hair, nails, the costume, the accessories, and all the effects that's going around, like wind and particles and all that. So I like to think about it as well while I'm doing the C1 process, because I'm thinking a little bit ahead of what's coming, and I'm making some decisions as I go. And I feel like with these markers is a great way to start using this tool. They're affordable, they're only 10 markers, and you can have a lot of usage. I've been having these markers for, I would say, 5 years or more, and I just been refilling them all the time, and I've been using them a lot. Sometimes I have seasons where I use them a lot, sometimes I just rather go back to pencils, but lately, with the amount of work that I have, I like to use markers so I can go faster and do more commissions, and it still looks good, so I like that. And sometimes I find that I spend more time adding subtle variations to the tones. Like, I work with C1 to C3, and it's great because I'm building up tones and I'm building some textures and making more decisions. But sometimes I feel I need to have a break and and I have to like step up a little bit more my tonal range. So sometimes I jump to C5 or C6, and that's why I want to start exploring a little bit more the dark tones. Because the principle here is that you establish your lightest light, and then you establish your darkest light, the darkest dark. So you know what is the range of how dark it's gonna be. Obviously, the lightest light is gonna be white, but it could be the lightest light could become C1 or C2. That's depending on the illustration that you're doing. I think about the material quality, you know, what kind of material is it made of and how reflective it is. For her sexy outfit is mostly latex and really tight fabric, so it will have some shine, some sharp highlights, and I'm thinking about that as I go. But as I'm refining the character and everything, I need to keep building more that suit that she's wearing. And I jump through different places, and because I have the C3 and I think, oh, maybe if I use the C3 I can push this element back, or what if I fill this element with C3, then now I have a more graphic shape that I can use for my illustration, you know. And at this point, I'm still pushing the values a little bit more. I think for this illustration, it can be a little bit doubting to move faster. You know, I could use a C7 or a C8 and to bring that dark tone. But I feel like I want to know how much can I go without overdoing it. You know, I don't want to like use too much dark and then have the too much contrast in the illustration. I want still to make it feel soft and that all the elements belong together with the picture and they have a nice contrast. So I go with C4, and I'm still a little bit shy, I have to admit, with the C4, and I guess I'm more like adding more details and redefining. So it's like both sides of the coloring and the rendering, you know. At one point you are pushing and filling areas, and other times I'm like adding details and making different decisions. And that's more the way I work and the way I like to work. But you can go really fast, and I think because I was recording this drawing, I was more mindful. Also, I like a lot how the drawing came at first, so I didn't want to like screw it up. So I took my time building it, and once I feel like the range, as I said before, from C1 to C3 and C4, they are giving me a good rendering, I think it's time to push a little bit more those values. So I use a C7 and I look for dark pockets, and for dark pockets I mean areas or forms that are close to each other. For example, the armpit and the chest, the breast and the rib cage, also the black shadow and around her neck. So I start going to those areas to start breaking up a little bit more and adding more three-dimensional feeling to my illustration. You know, like using that dark tone, I can create a little bit of thickness or like a bevel to the suit, like I did around the stomach area. And then I'm more defining and adding more details there. And that's with the C7. Because now I feel like C7 is going to be my darkest dark, but I have to see how it works later. And even though I work a lot with the C4 and the C3, for example, in this area, I find myself that I'm covering a lot of the work that I did. Especially in the arms, I'm covering a lot of the C3 and C4 shading, but that's okay. I just wanted to make sure that I'm arriving smoothly to the C7, to that dark tone. So yes, that's so that's what I'm doing. I'm thinking more about like, okay, I think I need to push more of the fabric, the material of the latex, you know, of the quality of the material. So I'm using the C7 to build that. I totally encourage you to get these markers, and they're not paying me for this, but I've been using them for a long time. I think they're really helpful if you are not secure or sure about your pencil work. Then you can use one of these markers, and as I said, have multiple copies of your ink illustration. Probably scan your ink illustration and then print out a few copies and print them out on a marker paper and use those to try different combinations. That's a good practice for sure. And here I'm looking to see where I can still use the C7, you know, trying to push that a little bit. And I'm using, what is it, C5, because I want to define the highlight for the breast. And you know, you have to decide what is the shape of the highlight. Probably still it is a little bit too big, so I'm going and letting it dry, and then see how it start blending with the rest of the rendering. I found that as I work around with on her clothes and using darker tones, I feel that the hair is actually lighter than I thought, you know. So I usually go back to the hair and I work it a little bit more and trying to bring that hair tone to the right point for the whole illustration. Even in the arms, I made a bunch of decisions before, but then I went over with the C6 or C5, and then I'm covering more because it's basically the same material. So I have to keep it equally, like equal tone, I feel. And I'm going back with the C7 again. When rendering latex, usually you have a rim light and then you have a really strong value, and then start like blending to a more soft gray. And I'm using the C7 to reinforce more of the shape and try to define the planes of the hand. Even here I did a lot of detail with the C2 and C3, but then I found that if I use the C7 and I made that area more graphic, like the ribbon around her waist, it will help me more than if I render it all the details on that one. I moved to a C8. C8, I think that's the darkest dark, and I really want to have that contrast around the edges, and I use it to push exactly the areas that I need. These are really, you know, really small touches that I like to add to the illustration. Here, around the edges, around her clothes, adding more contrast, because I think that the drawing needed more contrast. So I went a little bit up to in the range. So I went to C8. And C8 actually was the one that worked pretty well for me. And when I'm when I'm rendering these illustrations in black and white, I want to keep in mind is the concept of transitioning from light to dark and from dark to light. So for the drawing, a good thing to keep in mind is that, like, if you're rendering, try to drag your eye from the top to the bottom of the picture and try to see if it follows that rule, which is like you have a light area and then a dark area and then a light area and then a dark area. That will give you contrast inside the image, and it will make the illustration read better, you know. It's used a lot. This technique is used a lot in the noir films and black and white films, especially the old-timey ones. It was just about a nice lighting and then dark and then light to create contrast and make the subject read properly, you know. And as I was working with this illustration, I found that the skin tone that I have, which was C1, was working fine. But I think that to create the backlighting scenario that I have in my head, I have to cover more of her chest and the front of her abdominals, and to have that in a more darker value, you know. Because if the light is coming from the back, then her chest and her stomach should be actually a little bit more darker because of the, you know, there's not that strong light there. So that's the good thing about markers. You can try to explore different like lighting scenarios and variations with that. Then I go back to her face. As I said, I feel that if the light is coming from the back, I probably need her face to be more dark or more covering markers like C2. Actually, I use a C1 and I just change the shape of the shading, you know, for the lighting of her face. Then I go with C3 and then I do some makeup rendering for her character, you know, adding some shades in her eyes, some lipstick, you know, rendering a little bit more to make it look cute and nice. And when using the markers, you have to get used to wait for the marker to dry to see the final tone. It usually appears darker, but when it dries, you can actually see how it's working with the rest of the paper, and then you get a good sense of what it is. It happens a lot when you're using C1 and then you feel that it's actually getting dark, but when it dries, it's actually really, really light, and you might feel that you're losing your time using C1 because it just kind of tends to disappear. And that's why you need to have more contrast in the image and save the whites for contrast. And as I work, I remember that I have to keep working on the other areas of the image, you know. There are details around it, and there are flowers, petals flowing around. There's some vines going around too. So I have to like move my focus away from the main character and focus a little bit on what's going on around her. Not over rendering it, because if I over render the background and everything that's going around her, she will lose that contrast that she has right now. And that's something we have to keep in mind too. Not to over render the whole background area of the character. Even if it's her own clothes, try not to over render it, and maybe simplify a little bit more so it's, you know, more appealing, and then you're bringing attention to the details of her clothes and you know, her face. Basically, that's where I want to bring the attention to her nice curvy body. In this area, I'm actually really careful. I'm using a C6 or C7, I'm not sure, to build a little bit of shade and shadow from that hood that she's wearing. And now I'm pushing it with a C7, and then I'm creating more shapes and more, you know, more contrast. Because I feel that I need more contrast around her hair and makeup, a little bit on her eyes, and now this is when I feel like, oh, now she's like coming back to life, you know. And now I'm like feeling the background with C2, I feel. And I wanted to talk a little bit about refilling your markers. Like having a dry marker like the one I'm using right now is not a bad thing. you can use this to your advantage and create nice textures until the marker runs out. And then once you refill it, you can overflow the marker with ink, and it will give you less stroke marks, and it will give you a more even coverage. Also, it will give you a kind of like watercolor look if you look close to the page. And you might not notice, but once you scan it or you look after it, you will see there's like a nice watery feeling because all the paper is already overflown with ink. Just be careful not to drop any ink in your art, or like have a drop on the wrong spot, because it could happen. So you have to be careful when you're overflowing your markers to create that smooth rendering. And that's it. This is the final illustration. I went to Photoshop and added more contrast, but this is basically what I did after that. It was a fairly easy process. I then later went back with some ink and I redefined the outline of the body, and so I did that. Also probably work a little bit on highlights, but mostly this is the illustration that I did. I hope you guys have enjoy this tutorial and enjoy the process of coloring using black and white. This is not going to be the only video I'm going to be making. I'm going to be making new videos, and I'm going to be talking probably about the same points. So if you have any questions about it, let me know so I can bring those questions and show you the answers for that in future videos. I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial process, and thank you for supporting my channel and supporting my career and enjoying the art that I do. So stay tuned, and there will be more content coming soon. Make sure to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Patreon, and all the platforms, and I'll be really grateful. Thank you very much, and see you next time.